All right, so your situation could always be worse and it could always be better. And where you end up, whether you make it better or whether you make it worse, is in large part, a function of how you view your situation. I was having this, I've been wanting to shoot this video for some time. Definitely over the last couple of weeks, I thought about it more and more, and I've got this. I've got 30 minutes to before a doctor's appointment, and so I decided to shoot it now. So, remember who the audience is for these videos. This is to my kids. This is to my my grandkids. To anybody who wants to listen. So, what I had been thinking about over the last couple of months is just how different the outcomes in my family, my brothers and sisters and I, have been compared to everyone else we grew up with. You know, again, quick background, quick reminder. You know, I'm the oldest of 5 kids, growing up in a blended family, right? So, 7 people growing up in a 2-bedroom trailer from when I was the age of 7 until, well, so from like 2nd grade until 8th grade, I think were our trailer park days. And you know, my adopted dad was the only person who worked. Neither of my parents went to college. You know, but they raised 5 kids. I think we had 4 different last names. There were some people related to one another. Only 2 of the kids had the same mother and father. You know, so our outcomes obviously can't be attributed to genetics, right? I mean, the biology component, the nature component of it can't have played a huge piece in our outcome, you know. And when we were living in a trailer park, we were like high class poor. So if you compared us to the other families that live in the trailer park, and I think there were like 8 trailers in this small trailer park that we lived in. There were always families in every trailer. Sometimes it was single parents, sometimes it was both parents. But I went back and I did I started looking up all the kids that I grew up with, right? And I couldn't find anyone who had the same outcomes as me and my brothers and sisters. So of the 5 kids that my parents raised, 4 of us moved up the socioeconomic, multiple rungs up the socioeconomic ladder. All 5 of us went to college. A couple of us have multiple degrees. But 4 of us have done really well in our lives. So you've got, a writer, you've got a teacher, you've got a corrections officer, and you have me. And then we have another one of our siblings who had trouble, like went to prison a couple of times, in and out of jail since he was a kid. He was always, as a teenager, just always getting in trouble. But as an adult, he's still a really good person. Like, all the time, he went to jail primarily for petty stuff, stupid stuff, stealing beer from a gas station, or bar fights. That was a big one. He went to prison for getting into a bar fight and beating a guy up really bad, and he was, angry, super angry, but he's also a phenomenal father, and great father to his son, and I mean, really amazing father. And he's one of the best brothers you could ever ask for. I mean, you know, like he, you know, you wouldn't even call him the black sheep of the family. Other than his criminal record, he's actually a really, really good person. And so, you know, there are no junkies in my family. There are no, nobody, it's everyone. The four of us have done really, really well. And to understand that, you have to understand like how we grew up. I've talked in a previous video. I talked about mindset and like the importance of how does mindset change from when you have no money to when you do have money. And what prompted this video was I was thinking, I got a notification that a guy that I had grown up with, who had lived in the trailer park with us, had recently died. He actually died here in Texas, and we grew up in upstate New York. And so it prompted me to start looking everybody up. Everybody, all the kids that I grew up with, and there's a couple who did okay. Like, I know a guy who became like a pretty well-known like carpenter, like really gifted, but looks like he had a lot of I wouldn't say he doesn't have the kind of life I would want to have, and I don't think anyone I know he's had problems with drugs and all this kind of stuff. Unstable family lives. If you look at my brothers and sisters, all of us have been married once. We're all still married to the same the same person that we first married. All five of us have been in relationships for decades now. All of our kids are good kids, and but when I start looking at the kids we grew up with, who grew up in the same environment, that is socioeconomically, I cannot find one person with a similar outcome as my siblings and I. And I can't ignore that. So I started talking with my brothers and sisters about this, because our childhood, my parents were pretty hard on us. I wouldn't say they definitely were not abusive. Like, my dad used to threaten to smack us upside the head or give us the belt all the time. But, I got the belt 5 times growing up. Like, in 5 times in my life, I got the belt. One other time, my dad hit me in the face, but that was after I took a swing at him when I was like 16 years old. And his whole attitude was, if you're going to act like a man, I'm going to treat you like one. My parents, there are some like key things about my parents that are most important to understand. Like, if my parents obviously are the ones who get the credit for our outcomes, and they don't get all the credit, but they get a huge piece of the credit. They're the fundamental difference between my siblings and I and everyone else who grew up. And when I'm talking about the sample size, it's a large sample size. Couple scores worth of people. So, say 40 other kids that I went and looked up compared to our outcomes. And my parents, basically, their approach was pretty straightforward, right? Number one, no excuses whatsoever. My parents were the type of people who would say, even when the teacher is wrong, they're right. So don't ever come home and say, you got a bad grade and it's the teacher's fault, or you got suspension and it's the teacher's fault, or, somehow the system was being unfair to you. Don't ever do that, because we don't care. Even when they're wrong, they're right. And my parents were not the type of parents who were like going to go to the school and defend their kids to, coaches or teachers. The answer was always work harder, work smarter, build better relationships, right? So number one, absolutely no excuses. I mean, and to a person, everyone in my family is going to tell you that. My parents did not allow us to make excuses, period. Now, we hated that as kids, but as adults, I'm so unbelievably grateful for it. Like, they just didn't even care about the excuse. Um, Number two, they told us openly, no one cares about our feelings. Like, outside of your family, no one truly cares about your feelings. And anybody who says that they do they've got an angle. They want something from you. Now, listen, a lot of people, outside my kids have heard that before, and this video is really for my kids and grandkids. And if anyone wants to know, any of my descendants or anyone wants to know, like, how did I achieve, what lessons that I've learned in life, that's what adversity and success is all about. It's about passing on what I learned, right? My parents told us that, outside of our family, no one cares about your feelings. Also, don't make decisions based on your feelings. That's another thing they used to say. But the big thing is, and I've mentioned this before, is discipline, respect, and hard work, right? And my parents used to drive this point home over and over and over again. And which brings me to, what's the purpose of this video? And this is it. One of the things that my dad used to say when I was growing up is, if everyone likes you, you're doing something wrong, right? And the reason why is, he said, there are people out there who are wrong. There are people who want to manipulate you. There are people who believe things that are just flat out wrong or counterproductive or dangerous. And if those people like you, then that means you are not risking offending them by challenging their ideas. And therefore, you're doing something wrong, right? And so I pass that on to my kids. So one of the things that I also talk to my kids about all the time is, don't copy the way that I parent. I'm raising adults, I'm not raising children. And so what I want you to do is, when you're older and you have clarity, by the time you're, say, 25 to 35, and you've got clarity about the way that I raised you, what I want you to do is, I want you to inventory the things, the strategies, the approaches, the beliefs that you think worked. I want you to highlight the ones you think didn't work, and I want you to tweak it, right? I want you to make it better and pass that on to the next generation. So, for example, my father, I agreed with most of what my father did. Most people would argue, most people who grew up with me would say that my dad was really, really hard on me growing up. Some people would argue that my dad was abusive to me growing up. And certainly, there's one of my siblings who says that, actually. I mean, I'm going to get to that message here in a second. Because your life can always be better, or your situation can always be better or always be worse. I personally am a person who sees the glass as half full. I find the silver lining in every situation. I don't know if I learned that or if I was born that way. I have no idea. But as long as I can remember, that's the approach I've taken. I do remember consciously saying, well, I mean, I could sit here and complain about this, or I can find the silver lining and learn and grow from it and turn lemons into lemonade. There are people who would argue that my dad was abusive to me, but when I look back on my childhood, my dad was a very masculine guy. He was a man's man. He was born in the 40s. He grew up in the 50s and the 60s. He had foregone a baseball career, a potential baseball career, to join the Army in the late 60s so that he could guarantee that his brother wasn't going to get drafted into Vietnam. Then he went and served in Vietnam, and then he came back, and he's in his 20s, and rather than go to college, he just gets a job working like in construction. And the whole time through his life, through his 20s and stuff, he, still was an athlete, still played, softball, and he got involved in trap shooting, which is a sport for rich people, really not for poor people. And he continued a life of setting goals, being disciplined, and bettering himself. And he held his kids to that standard. My dad grew up at a time where men didn't express their emotions. They didn't tell their kids they loved them. They didn't hug and kiss their kids. Like, that's how my father was, right? And he didn't. My dad did tell us he loved us, but not very often. I knew my dad loved me. He just didn't express it. And then the other thing is, he would hit us with a belt. He hit me with a belt, not all of us. He hit me and my brother Jerry, and I think one of my other brother too, a couple times. But I got the belt 5 times in my childhood. 4 of the times I absolutely 100% deserved it. I did things that I would have given my own kids the belt for. Like, one time I wrecked my mom's car when I was 15 years old and did thousands of dollars of damage on it, in the middle of the summer. I'm surprised my mother didn't kill me, rip my throat out. Another time I started a campfire in the woods when I was like 10 years old in the summer during the dry season. Nearly burnt the woods down. I mean, another time I called my mom a not so nice name, a very not so nice name. My point is while my dad was a hard guy, he wasn't an abusive guy. He really wasn't. But that discipline that he taught us was invaluable to my life, like absolutely invaluable. And over the course of my father's life, he moved up the socioeconomic ladder, after all the kids moved out. He became a very, world famous trap shooter, inducted into the New York State Trap Shooting Hall of Fame, multiple state and national and regional championships, sponsored by Remington, sponsored by Beretta. Like, he set goals and he achieved them. And us kids got to observe that. And lately, now that I'm in my 40s, I've been catching back up with all these people I grew up with, and I can't find a single example of a person we grew up with in the trailer parks who have similar outcomes to me and my siblings. My parents raised, 80% of the kids that they raised, 4 out of the 5 kids that they raised, jumped multiple rungs on the socioeconomic ladder. Multiple degrees, just, you can't argue with the results, right? Which brings me to the last point of this conversation. I was having a conversation with someone I grew up with, a relative of mine, and she and I disagree on some of the methods, who gets the credit for our outcomes, and she really doesn't. She and I see the situation with my dad very differently. The rest of my siblings see it my way, and then, but this one sibling doesn't. And I respect her opinion and everything. But what's important to note is that really the only difference between the way I view our situation growing up, looking back on it, and how she views it, is that she sees the glass as half empty. She holds our parents to an unachievable standard. She says, well, why couldn't they have done X? Or why couldn't they have done Y? Rather than being grateful that they did A, B, C, and D. My approach to parenting has been, what did they do right? And how did what they did right translate into positive outcomes for me? 2 things that my dad did that I don't do. Number 1, my father didn't show affection. As a parent, I learned really early, I'm going to be a parent who, dotes and loves on my children. So lots of kisses, lots of hugs, I love yous all the time. Super, super tight. Number 2, my dad wanted us, in order for us to spend time with our father, we had to be into the things my dad was into. So I had to go hunting and fishing. He needed to go trap shooting, which, by the way, I love doing those things, but those weren't my interests. I mean, I was a basketball player. I was a baseball player. I was into music. I was into dancing, right? I was into movies. Um, and all my relationship with my father was always on my dad's terms, especially even as I got older. And I realized that if I wanted a much more meaningful long-term relationship with my kids, then as my kids were becoming adults, I needed to transition my interests to theirs. So rather than having my kids spend time with me doing what I love to do, I try to show interest in what they love to do. Okay? Because I believe that'll translate into a much more meaningful long-term relationship. So if you, for example, in order to spend time with my dad, once I had a career and I made plenty of money, I started writing for a magazine called Trap Shooting USA so that I had a full-time job as an engineer working for Nucor Steel, and then I got a side gig writing for this trap shooting magazine so that I could travel the country on the weekends, spend time with my father shooting, and in just being in his company, okay? But once I stopped doing that, my dad and I didn't really have anything to talk about anymore. And if you look at our relationship, I talk to my dad, once or twice a year. He's a man of very few words anyways, but because we don't have so much in common in terms of our interests, we don't really talk that much. Whereas with my kids, now that my kids are all older, I'm into programming and gaming with my youngest son. I'm into powerlifting with and entrepreneurship with my two older sons. And with my daughter, I'm into fine food and music, right, and entertainment. But I do all those things because those are their interests. And that's something that I learned that's different, that I do differently. Okay? The last thing is that when I was talking to this other family member who wants to hold our parents to a standard that they couldn't possibly meet, okay? Why we do this in our society all the time. We're holding, Abraham Lincoln and George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. We're holding our forefathers to a 21st century standard when we judge them. And I think that's dangerous. I don't think it's not just dangerous to their reputation, to our parents' reputation, their generation's reputation. It's dangerous to us because it'll trap us. It'll give us a built-in excuse to fail. And the best way to achieve success out of any challenge is to make the right choice when you face that adversity. And the way you make the best choices is a function of what you believe, what your perspective is on that situation, and then the values that you use to run your decisions through. Okay? That perspective is a thing we've never talked about before. The glass being half full. What's the win here? What's the silver lining? I focus on all the things that my parents did right and the good outcomes those right things led into. And I think that's played a huge role in my success in life. I think it'll play a huge role in your success in life. My couple of my siblings view it exactly the same way I do. Actually, two of them definitely, absolutely, 100% do. So the three of us see it exactly the same way, and we're not shackled, right, with disappointment and discontent. And we do have a sibling who is shackled by that. And as I, over the last few months, as I started looking at, man, look how successful we all are. And look how much everyone we grew up with struggled. I mean, we were poor. We had to save up to be poor. My parents, by their pride, we didn't take any welfare, like no food stamps, no anything. That was a decision by my father. That he's not going to do that. I do remember like government cheese and government peanut butter getting dropped off at our house one time. but I don't think we ever used it. But we weren't on food stamps or anything like that. And me growing up, I qualified for free lunch at my school, and I never used it. Especially in high school, never once did I ever use it. I always had that free lunch card, and I never used it because I felt like using it would shackle me, right? I digress there, but because the point here is that your situation could always be worse and it could always be better. And it's much better to have the attitude it could always be worse. Because that means you're focusing on the good things about your situation. Now, I'm grateful for my parents. I'm grateful for everyone who gave me the tools and the lessons that translated into success in my life. But you could strip all of that away, all of that, all the intervention, and if the only thing that you gave me growing up was the 3 values that came out of my family: discipline, respect, and hard work. You didn't allow me to make excuses. Like, no matter what, I had to own every outcome of my life, even if it wasn't my fault. I had to own it. And you gave me the ability to find the silver lining in every situation. So just those 5 things. That would be a recipe for social mobility. And I was talking the other day with my kids, and I said, if what we want to do is improve equity in life, we want more equitable outcomes for people, then what we need to be sharing with the world, not, right now it's all about income redistribution. What we really want to be redistributing is the mindset. Those 5 things. You translate that, you give those tools to basically anyone, and you're going to see social mobility. You're going to. En masse. All right, so the question, the action item. Do you see the glass as half full or half empty? Do you find the silver lining in every terrible situation? Do you always think, hey, it could always be worse? Or do you think it could be better? Do you hold people around you to an unfair standard? Especially those who came before you. The people who have 30 years in it, your company. Your grandparents, your parents. What is your mindset? All right. Like, share, subscribe, yada, 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 all those things. And I'll see you in the next one.